Hymns House, Episode 3. I'm Jonathan Stern, and as always, I'm joined by Lewis Stevens and Dr. H. Before diving into today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to announce that Hymns House is live. We are live across the internet, hymnshouse.com, Twitter at Hymns House, and most importantly, we are live on Discord. The link is on our Twitter. You can also find it at hymnshouse.com. And as Lewis put it the other day, the community has been absolutely electric. It is time now to jump into the show. I was happy with how episode 1 turned out, but after watching it back, doing a little editing, realized we could have painted an even fuller picture for people who are new to the Hymns story. So today I want to do just that. Let's start with a little history. Lewis, could you offer an origin story of Hymns and Hers?
All right, so I think the best place to start is with the founder psychology. I think, with any business, especially early on in the business and for a long period thereafter, the culture of the business will be informed by the psychology of the founder or the founding team. And in the case of Hymns and Hers Health, it is CEO Andrew Dudum. He founded the business with a couple co-founders, and that was in November 2017. But I think it's worth dialing back the hands of time a little bit further and investigating Andrew Dudum's origin stories himself. He went to University of Pennsylvania, where famously Elon Musk went to undergrad. And for those unfamiliar with the University of Pennsylvania, for those potentially internationally watching this, University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League school, which I say only to illustrate and communicate that you either have to have a really high IQ or an insanely good work ethic. From there, he joined a company called Atomic Studios, which is a startup incubator. And basically, it's like a venture capital company / startup incubator where they incubate startup ideas, fund them, and try to nurture them, grow them, finding product market fit, but also scaling the product after having found product market fit. So Andrew Dudum worked at Atomic Studios for a period of time. And then at some point, he identified that digital healthcare was a growing trend. I think it's interesting because Teladoc was founded in 2002. So the concept of digital healthcare has been around for at least 22 years. But I would argue, people were creating businesses on the internet in the early 90s. There was, the idea for digital healthcare emerged likely in the 90s. But what's so interesting about the idea that business models emerge in eras preceding when they really take off or where they become profitable and become a defining category, there's a lot of ideas that come about potentially decades before they're profitable. Mark Cuban was famous for putting sports streaming on the internet in the 90s. And ultimately, even today, it's not really a fully profitable business. People are putting music and all kinds of media on the internet in the 90s. So I think it's fascinating that there can be latent periods where ideas are explored or attempted. Pets.com was an interesting one. That is now today Chewy, right? It didn't work in the early 2000s, but today it's a viable $10 billion business. So I think my point about all of this is that at some point, Andrew Dudum noticed that, and his co-founders noticed that digital healthcare, there was actually a way to make this a profitable business model.
Let's get into the idea and the industry and the problem that Dudum was solving. What is wrong with the U.S. healthcare system that makes an idea like digital healthcare, telehealth, the sort of business that Hymns wants to build, viable and exciting? Why is it that we need a company like Hymns in the United States?
I'm going to say something and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. H, who can probably answer this better because, frankly, I'm not a total expert on the healthcare industry. Dr. H will definitely be better at describing this. But My contrarian take is that American healthcare has redeeming qualities. One of which is the fact that we're the innovation center for all of medicine on Earth, and all of the systems that are so much better than ours are riding on our coattails. And yeah, there's certainly faults in the system, but we're the innovation engine for medicine, for healthcare products like Hims and Hers Health. Like, we are leading the world in that regard. Anyway, those faults, and Hims and Hers Health clearly has created something that is addressing a problem, else it wouldn't have a huge profitable $1.4 billion business. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. H.
Thanks, Louis. Totally agree with you. I mean, United States is the forefront of healthcare innovation, technology, development, research and development. A lot of great stuff is happening here in the United States. And overall, I think it's going to advance, healthcare outcomes in the long run. Biggest issues, I think, is how healthcare is delivered and how people access healthcare. It's just a very fractured, disjointed system of how a person or family would go about getting their healthcare. You can get healthcare through health insurance, whether you're paying for it yourself on the market or if it's covered partially or subsidized by your employer. That's how you get typical health insurance. There's subsidized care through government programs like Medicare, Medicaid. You could fall outside those cracks and try to pay things yourself, cash pay. So it's just a very complicated system where, clinicians, hospital systems, healthcare systems are all there to provide care, but also need to get paid too. And who's doing the paying? Who's the customer? Who's the client? It's just a very big tangled spider web of the players involved.
Who is the customer in the modern healthcare industry?
You would assume the patient is the customer client, but there's a way of thinking that we're not really the customer client. Healthcare insurance companies are a big player in this. And when you look at how healthcare is billed, you're looking at who's negotiating the cost of healthcare and who's paying for it. It's basically the healthcare system, a hospital system, a doctor's group are negotiating contracts with healthcare insurance companies, and healthcare insurance companies will then pay the cost to the doctors or hospital. And it's just, a very I mentioned this, it's just very convoluted way of providing care when I feel like the person or the individual family or patient really should be the one who is really driving their healthcare and be the person whose attention is on, and we're focused on providing great medical care for the individual. And when there's huge market players like insurance and big healthcare systems involved, it's just, extra things in the way that could prevent people from getting great healthcare. In terms of what problem HIMSS is trying to solve, it's just dealing with this whole complex way of people get medical care. And I went through Andrew Dudum's Twitter X account, and there are a few posts that he mentioned that kind of paint the picture of what he's trying to solve. Number one of the most recent posts he said, price is a first obstacle in someone's journey towards getting healthcare. People are sometimes unable to afford health insurance to get medical care in the classic, typical way. Medicines can be very expensive. Brand name medicines, even generics, can be expensive. Sometimes, even if you have health insurance, you still might have a challenge getting the right medicines that you need. And actually, Andrew Dudum even mentioned that. He said, quote, even having health insurance doesn't mean access to the care you need. He brings up the example of, health insurance plans can decline coverage, require prior authorizations, make you jump through hoops to get the medicine that the doctor prescribed. So I think one of the core objectives that HIMSS is trying to achieve is just to provide greater access of affordable healthcare to all people. And obviously, the company started in the United States, but he's even mentioned in some plans of going international. So just trying to really provide greater access of high quality, yet more affordable care.
HIMSS isn't the first company that's tried this. As Louis alluded to, there have been others. There's Teladoc. I guess there is Teladoc. How is HIMSS' approach different from other companies like Teladoc that have tried to fix some of these problems?
Dr. H, I think you were actually providing a great response to it in the Discord recently. So I'd be interested to hear your take.
Yeah, I want to kind of bring attention to another Andrew Dudum tweet. He liked to tweet, some other Twitter user was really analyzing HIMSS model, and they likened the HIMSS model as a closed loop system. And then there's this diagram about, 3 different pillars. Using technology was one pillar, using AI to capture data of all these patient encounters to really drive forward in a data-driven way to help clinicians provide optimal medical care. And that goes to the next step in this little diagram where they are partnered or have their own medical manufacturing capabilities. So a pharmacy or a pharmaceutical place who can really develop these specific medicines that HIMSS is trying to create. And then the third part of it is, having a strong pool, a strong team of medical providers and doctors who are specifically trained in these conditions that HIMSS is dealing with and who are comfortable meeting people where they are. In the year 2024, we're using technology and virtual visits and things to help provide this care for people. And this closed loop system really ends up being something that is almost opposite of what I described earlier with the really convoluted, disjointed system where you have insurance is here and your hospital is here, and then the pharmacy might not be covered or the provider might not be part of your plan, and you can't get your medicine. So that was something that really resonated with me, is that you have a really streamlined system, workflow, whatever you want to call it, where a patient is basically guided through this whole journey from start to finish, where they come seeking help, they get provided great medical care, they get their medicine, and then they are set up for appropriate follow-up and things like that without having all these side journeys and side quests. I used to play video games, and you have RPGs where there's this main goal you want to get to the end, but then you're distracted by all these side quests that you have to accomplish. So that's kind of like what HIMSS is trying to address here. They're taking away all these extraneous, unnecessary side quests in your healthcare journey to just get you paired up with the doctor, paired up with the medicine, and get you on your way. I think that was a really important thing that differentiates HIMSS from something like Teladoc. Teladoc, they still partner with insurance, so they actually have negotiated contracts with insurance companies who may provide the Teladoc service as a benefit to working with Ford or GM. I'm just naming companies, but if there's a health plan that's employee sponsored, they may say you can enjoy 10 Teladoc service appointments a year, and these are part of your benefits, and this is going to lower your cost of healthcare. The other difference is Teladoc doesn't directly have their own source for medicines like how HIMSS would have. So you're still dealing with working with a pharmacy and insurance coverage to try to get those medicines covered for you. And you kind of run into the same issue as before. So slight differences in how Teladoc would approach their virtual services with something like HIMSS.
Anything you'd like to add on to that, Louis?
Yeah, so this was the other point that I wanted to bring up. But I think an interesting way to look at it is through the lens of what Uber accomplished. You could think of the legacy taxi system in the same way that Dr. H thought about the traditional primary care, urgent care sort of medical system. You'd have to use a telephone to call a dispatch. The dispatch would have to call the taxi driver. The taxi driver would have to use his own map system or memory. Well, he would memorize it. There was a study done on London cab drivers and their ability to memorize streets, and it was like this savant level memory that they would develop, even if they weren't.
I think I read this etched on the brains of these taxi drivers. Their neuro makeup was quite different from the rest of people. I read the same study, Louis. Fascinating study.
Yeah, they became geniuses, and that studies like those give me a lot of faith in humanity. That we're all capable of being geniuses in some regard. But I'm describing a clunky system, and so they have to rely on their memory, and then they have to show up and find a person. They don't know who that person is. There's inefficiency in trust. The person doesn't really know who they're looking for. The payment scheme, how is the acquiring side built into the experience? There's routing, all of that. It was such a clunky, difficult system to navigate, the legacy taxi industry. And so HIMS vertically integrated that entire experience, payments, routing, trust, dispatch, payroll, HR for the drivers. They vertically integrated literally the entire ecosystem. I feel like people, there's the famous quote that Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, said that Uber, what's Uber's moat? A cat could code its app. And then people say the same thing about HIMS. And it's like, with all due respect to Larry Ellison, who's now like the second wealthiest man in the world, and who has, been an audacious founder, an incredible titan of business in America. But, he says it's an app, and it's like he's missing the entire value proposition, which is the vertical integration of this very clunky and difficult legacy taxi ecosystem. And so Dr. H basically described this vertical integration, and we could do the same exercise that I went through for Uber, we could use for HIMS. And it illustrates that this is a differentiated platform creating a differentiated experience with correspondingly differentiated unit economics. And HIMS has materially differentiated economics relative to anything we've seen in this industry so far. Sometimes I'm forgetting that I'm talking to people who may have never heard of any of this. So,
and I'll just say it's likely that we'll do an entire episode on HIMS unit economics, because it really is extraordinary and deserving of probably 25 or 30 minutes on its own. But go on, Lewis.
So this is a simplistic view, and we could do hours on these unit economics because it's such a controversy. The controversy has been going on for 4 years. I will note, at the end of which we now have the highest free cash flow margins in the company's history. So the bears have been very vocal for years now, and it's noteworthy that HIMS is doing better than it's ever done. So here, I'm going to complete my thought. The simplistic way to think about HIMS versus Teladoc is Teladoc has 65 million members, from whom it generates $2.4 billion. And that $2.4 billion generates scantily any free cash flow. There's barely any free cash flow that is derived from the 65 million members that Teladoc has that are a part of the network that Dr. Ace described earlier. Conversely, HIMS has 2 million members, from whom it generates $1.4 billion in revenue. And that $1.4 billion of revenue generates 15% times $1.4 billion in free cash flow. So substantial free cash flow already. And I'm annualizing some numbers. But as of Q2 2024, that was the math that we had.
Is the main difference basically that HIMS makes money off of their medicines and subscriptions too, whereas Teladoc does not?
It's a bundling factor for HIMS. The appointment and the medication are all in the one fee that's paid. And that is a part of the value proposition that I think is attractive, right? That's correct, right, Dr. H?
There's no additional doctor's visit fee on HIMS. It's all rolled into the subscription.
And I think this really illustrates that it's a fundamentally different business model. And Teladoc is why primary care physicians and urgent care centers feel that they have great job security. I mean, mom and pop grocers were put out of business by Walmart. That's just the straight up reality. It's called creative destruction. As an analyst of HIMS, I'm not like some of the communities that are rooting for the demise of. It's like, not only do we have to win, but everybody else has to lose. It's like, that's not my mentality at all. But the reality is, primary care physicians, urgent cares have looked at Teladoc's business model and they said, what do we have to worry about? They're not going to take any share. It's clunky. They couldn't even build their psychiatric care. They had to acquire BetterHelp, which that's actually probably the only redeeming thing in the entire business model right now, is they've done pretty well with the BetterHelp acquisition. They couldn't build a chronic care management platform. They had to acquire Livongo. They acquired it for $18 billion, wrote the entire thing down to zero. one of the greatest destructions of capital in the history of American capitalism, really, rivaled only by dot-com bubble and 0809, and probably some preceding periods. But now, HIMSS has created a differentiated business model with differentiated economics, and they have organically built it all from a single source of code. And they have the capacity as a company that has, gross profit growth velocity, capital velocity, their unit economics are positive. It's a huge industry, but for the first time ever, there's a real legitimate threat to primary care physicians and urgent care in terms of scooping up, capturing the 20, 30, 40 somethings that are running into the problems that HIMSS addresses.
I want to go back to when the company was founded and think about the business model. Now, we touched on the business model in the last episode, said, is HIMSS like Netflix? Is it like a SaaS company? Is it direct to consumer? Is it Allbirds? Is it Nike? What is this thing? Who does it compete with? Urgent care, primary care, and so forth. So we don't need to go through all of that again. But I want to understand how the business model has evolved since day one. What was it like then? What is it like now? And what may it look like in the future?
I can talk a bit from what it was like as a doctor in the earlier days. I joined in late 2018, 2019, so HIMSS was probably a year and a half, almost 2 years old. Even then, it was in its early stages. I almost feel like it was more of like a direct-to-consumer service where they had two services, mainly hair loss, erectile dysfunction. The patient gets matched up to the doctor who prescribes a generic medicine that gets delivered to the patient's door. Basic treatments, things that you could probably get if you were able to get an appointment with your primary doctor, and if your primary doctor also didn't judge you or stereotype you and say no to your request for help. That was something they did for a while, and then they slowly added for hers, the women's section. They expanded with acquiring the dermatology business, so skincare products after that. Mental health was then added around the same time as skincare. So for a while, it was just basic ED medicine, hair loss, and we'll send you your generic finasteride, we'll send you your generic Viagra. And it slowly morphed into other realms of different treatment and verticals, different areas of health conditions, but also not just generic medicines. Anyone can offer generic medicines. You can start up a company and offer generic medicines, probably for cheaper than what HIMSS does when they initially offered their generic medicines. But they evolved in, I think they want to focus on personalized treatments where someone might do better with a custom dosage. Someone might do better with a multi-condition treatment. Someone might do better with all these different things that they can modify in the medicine to have less side effects with same or better efficacy. So it started out providing generic medicines and basic treatments, and now they're really going for something that's more unique.
The only thing I guess I would add is Teladoc acquired a company called Livongo, which is a chronic care management company. So it is, it was because it was bought for 18 billion and it was written down, the whole 18 billion, I think, or 99% of the 18 billion was written down as incomprehensible levels of capital destruction. And that's, if you look at Teladoc's share price, in large part, the reason that it has declined to such a degree is related to that shareholder capital incineration through that acquisition. But my main point is, I think HIMSS is at a point where it's venturing into chronic care management. Weight loss is a chronic issue where a medication, a therapeutic is provided to a patient. The patient then begins on the protocol associated with that intervention, and it needs to be monitored for efficacy over time. And there's a host of factors that go into monitoring patients that suffer from chronic conditions. And Livongo was a platform designed for that was really promising and doing very well. And I think diabetes was Livongo's specialty. And it was a digital platform that was profitable, that was just totally destroyed by Teladoc. And I think that gives us insight or a glimpse into what HIMS could do next through its ability to build from a single source of code and to create really compelling products, such as the HERS brand. At one point, HIMS was just one brand, and now it is two brands, and two very successful brands, highlighted by the fact that Roman Health, HIMS' number one competitor, tried to field a female brand to compete with HIMS' HERS brand. Can HIMS venture into chronic care management and create a compelling platform and do that organically? And the answer so far for the last 6.5 years is resoundingly yes. And I think that, building from what Dr. H said, the next iteration of HIMS is addressing these chronic care conditions. It's less sexy, which is HIMS is selling sexual health stuff. So it's like literally and figuratively sexy. But I think that will more fully illustrate that HIMS is this vertically integrated primary care physician. That's the Uber of the primary care physician TAM in America. And I don't want to get ahead of our skis, but that's where we're at in the evolution. And those that believe in the thesis have to believe that HIMS can pull these things off.
Louis, do you know this is kind of related, but how did Teladoc screw up the Livongo thing? I'll tell you from a doctor standpoint, I was actually with Teladoc when they did that Livongo purchase. And at the time, I remember thinking, like, talking to my other doctor friends who were on Teladoc, we're like, this system they have, the technology, it's not going to be able to handle chronic care conditions. Everything was it was like a basic electronic medical record. There was no integration with lab follow-up or blood work or places where you go to get blood testing. Everything was more catered towards, oh, my 5-year-old has an ear infection or something like that. So even from a tech standpoint, when this happened, we're like, how's this going to work? We didn't see how they were going to integrate the chronic care disease model into this platform on the doctor side, which was not something that we saw they were capable of doing.
Yeah, I think that's the reason I was shaking my head yes to the whole thing was because those ideas were so exciting to me, because it illustrates what I was saying. Teladoc did not have the technological acumen. It didn't have the software engineering talent. HIMS has the technical acumen. It has the software engineering capabilities to develop what you're describing, Dr. H. And that's just something that's so heartening to hear that, look, the reason that this didn't work was because Teladoc was simply an inferior company as a technology company. It wasn't a technology company. And so to that end, my second insight is when the acquisition happened, I had people living in Silicon Valley who messaged me who said, hey, the management at Livongo is jumping ship. Like the Teladoc is being too heavy-handed in the acquisition integration, and the people at Livongo just don't want to be a part of it anymore. And so they're jumping ship. And that was essentially, those rumors were, the beginnings of the unraveling and the total destruction of shareholder capital. And it makes sense that happened. Teladoc had no technological acumen. I would argue that Livongo wasn't that technologically advanced, and it had built a profitable scaling platform that was really compelling for chronic care management. And it was just that Teladoc was so poorly orchestrated from a software engineering perspective that even with the basic platform like Livongo, it blew that up because it was just so inferior technologically. And so thinking about HIMS, everything's so clean. Everything is so clean. And I know there's glitches with the apps and this and that happens from time to time. But relatively speaking, the way that they launched the HERS brand and just the design of the website, like I was looking at it today and the website is just beautiful. It's so well designed, and the design is always evolving and shifting. And you know that the reason it's evolving and shifting is because they're doing A/B testing. They're using data-driven analysis of what the website should look like. If this is placed here, is it going to create conversion in this way? They're wringing out margin out of the design of the website. So I think just everything we've discussed illustrates that there's a code to crack here. There's a problem to solve that has yet to be solved. It's like trying to vertically integrate the taxi industry in 1998. It just wouldn't have worked. There wasn't the right team. There wasn't cell phone, there wasn't smartphones. It was too early. And so Teladoc built this culture in the 2000s and then through the 2010s, and it was too early. It just couldn't execute the business model. And so now HIMSS has emerged. It's created profitable unit economics. And I think it can create a Livongo. The weight loss is something for a whole podcast.
I think when HIMSS is really going to approach going into chronic care management, I have a lot more confidence that they're going to be able to do it than Teladoc ever did. Even at the time, I mentioned we didn't have confidence as the doctors that Teladoc was going to be able to do it. And just to kind of go along with what you mentioned about their HIMSS's tech and software development capabilities, HIMSS's system from a doctor's perspective is and was so much easier to use to do these consults and to communicate with the patients than Teladoc ever was. It got to the point where Teladoc was like, man, this is such an archaic system. It's a hassle and a pain for me to log on to Teladoc to see patients. And just by experiencing that, I slowly turned away from Teladoc basically and started doing more work with HIMSS because HIMSS was just so easy from a systems user interface from the back end. I could easily see these patients with all their health information presented nicely in a very clear, concise way where it's easy for me to make a medical decision. I could do this while I'm sitting next to my wife watching Bridgerton at night, So it's just like, it just ended up being so much easier to use.
I feel like that's just a true story.
I can't make this stuff up, so it's true. But it's just like from that tech standpoint, they had it so much better, even from day one, than Teladoc, where it just made it easy for the doctors to happily log on and do great work. And even then, I felt like HIMSS probably was going to be more technologically advanced to be able to pull something off, and Teladoc wasn't.
I think that's a great place to leave it. This has been HIMSS House episode 3. Don't forget to join the Discord where the conversation never stops. We will see you next time. Thank you.